Welcome back to another great episode of Comedians in Bed. And as always, I have I didn't mess up the intro, but it's cool because sometimes you mess up jokes and you be like, how am I going to recover from this? So we're just going to recover from it. This is a podcast where comedians could be comedians. And as always, I don't really know what that means. It just really sounds like something you should say on a podcast. So, but as always, I have another great guest. And you know me, I got to give an introduction. Now, rather, if he got a freshly cut, shaved beard or not, this guy's the hottest thing on the stage. All right. He's the freshest thing on the stage. Right. He's the best looking thing on the stage. Right. I don't care if it's the mic, the stool. He's the best one on the stage. All right. The jokes are proving it, baby. All right. This dude is traveling all over the world. And I'm so glad that we got him here on the second best podcast in Columbus, Ohio. Please, everybody, give it up for Myq Kaplan, everybody.
Wow. I didn't know how many people there were going to be applauding. That is so kind of you. Thank you so much for having me. And very thoughtful. I do think that I am better looking than a stool. I really appreciate it. Happy
Sometimes, man,
here.
sometimes I second guess myself, man. That mic stand be a little taller than me. I'm only 5'5". So,
Yes, I understand.
yeah, you gotta work with what you got, man. Myq, how are you feeling today?
I am well. I'm always happy to talk to another comedian, and it's fun to connect and chat and get to know. Like, we don't know each other well, but after this, that'll all be different. So it's exciting. Happy to be here.
Man, Myq, I'm only like 4.5 years in. I don't know if I'm even am I even a comic yet? Like, I don't know. Like, sometimes I feel like I'm not.
Well, let me say this to you. I've been doing comedy for 22 years about, and so I understand your question that, you're like, I did a show once when I was actually probably exactly the amount that you're in, about like I started 2002, 2006 or so. I was opening for Larry Miller, who had been, big, doing it since the 80s, a contemporary of Seinfeld, movie star, super nice man and super funny. And I remember in the green room before our first show, he was just so friendly. I don't know if you ever do shows where sometimes they're like, the green room is for the headliner only, like, we don't have enough room or we don't want you here. But he was like, come on in. And he was just so friendly. And he was like, can you believe that we get to do this, that we are brothers in this fraternity of comedy? And I was like, we are doing the same thing, me, this 4-year comedian, and this millionaire. And here's the thing is, I felt the same way. I'm like, am I the same as him? But, compared to him, maybe I felt like I was, quote, less of a comedian. But compared to anyone, most people in the world haven't done any years of comedy. So compared to them, compared to billions of people, you're a comedian.
Yeah, man. Yeah. 4.5 years in. Sometimes you have those nights where you be like, all right, I'm not going back up. I'm not doing it. But to be honest, I do feel like a comic. I think I would feel more like a comic when I do it full time. I'm in no rush because it's a learning curve, and I am definitely enjoying the journey. I was talking to my good comedian friend the other day, Mo Hill. He's a strong feature. He's features for Tony Roberts. And I was telling him, man, it's different levels to this. So many different levels to this. And I love to learn, so I'm enjoying learning the different levels that there is to comedy. Like 22 years, I can't even imagine the demons that you fight at 22 years.
Yes, they are. Well, I'm only 5'6", so they're 5'7" demons. And I just want to say that what a great attitude that you have. I mean, to love, like, life is about learning, and comedy is about, it's all about growing, and a bunch of, like, corny sounding things that are the truth. They're, cliches because they're true. I want to commend you for, not wanting to, like, you start out, you want to be a professional, you want to be successful, you want to be making your living doing it. And like, there's two ways you can make your living doing it. You can, like, right now, whatever money you're making from comedy, you could be like, well, what size tiny box can I live in? That's like Mike Birbiglia used to have a joke about his apartment in New York City. He's like, it's just a little bit bigger than my body,
Yeah.
and so you can live you could live out of your car. And like, there's a lot of people who do. You live out of a
Yeah.
car, live out of a van, live that life, and you want that. But there's a friend of mine, Sarah Benincasa, wrote a book of nonfiction essays, and the title essay is called "Real Artists Have Day Jobs." And
Yeah.
that, like, you're there, like, you'll get there, if
Yeah.
you keep, putting in the work and the time. And it's good to not rush yourself. It's good to not put pressure on yourself, to, like, there's this guy, Mark Nepo, who's a poet, who has like this book that my girlfriend and I read, that every day of the year there's like a different story, a different lesson, a different, meditation. And one of them's about a rose and how, like, a rose blossoms at its own rate. Like, you can't
Mhm.
rush a rose. Like, the rose isn't like, I got to open my petals sooner. It happens
Right.
at the exact natural rate that it's meant to. And that's the same for, every human being doing what we're doing. So,
Yeah. I
uh,
think I realized when it was this past weekend I had went to, this is my first time going to a theater show. I went to go see Miss Pat. She was here in Columbus.
cool.
And I think a couple days before I found out that she was going to be opening for Martin Lawrence and his new arena tour for some cities. And when she was here, and it's not to like, shoot her down or anything like that, it didn't sell out. Like I think it probably, out of 900 seats, she probably sold like 500 seats or whatever. And I was like, but if she probably went to a different city, it would probably be packed. Like people would probably be mad that they couldn't find shows. So I was like, it's just levels to this, because the last time she was here, she was in clubs, and now she's in theaters. So now she has to probably go on another theater tour to sell them all out. And then, now even though she's in theaters, she's starting to open up in arenas. So I'm like, there's so many different levels that once you feel like you've made it, it's kind of like, there's a whole nother level. But
Yeah.
it makes it fun, because it's kind of like a video game. It's trying to like kind of conquer the next level or whatever. That's kind of how I see it.
Absolutely. Like, Kevin Hart obviously is, selling out, stadiums wherever he goes. But obviously, on the intergalactic level, he's like opening for some alien, he shows
Yeah,
up on a new planet. Like, they don't even, only 500 aliens come to see Kevin Hart when he's off of Earth. Like, he's
yeah,
only one of the most popular comedians on Earth. But
yeah,
it's exactly right. When I started out in Boston, I started at a place called the Comedy Studio. And it was like the gold, I feel like the gold standard of the experience that I wanted was like just to get to perform there on a Saturday night,
yeah,
like, wow. Like, I first got booked there like on a Thursday or a Sunday or what, but like the weekend shows, like, that's when the real good perform, that's what you wanted. That was the
yeah,
show. And then, like 15 years in, like, I moved away from Boston, and I would come back to Boston. Then, like, oh, I would just go on a Saturday night and they would put me on and I would have fun. And it became,
mhm,
it wasn't like my open mic, but, like, Chris Rock will go to the Comedy Cellar and try new things.
yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
you get booked, you get passed at the cellar, and you're like, I got to go there and do my A game every time until, Chris Rock can go there and do his Z game.
yeah, yeah, yeah. How was doing comedy in Boston coming up? Because I'm not even gonna lie to you, I have no desire to do comedy in Boston. I just feel I'm just a little scared. It's not as nothing to do with comedy. I'm just like, I will never go to. I can't even believe I used to be a Boston Celtics fan. Like,
Ha ha ha.
how is doing comedy in Boston?
Well, that's really funny. First, thank you for not lying to me. I appreciate that you never lie to me. You have a kind face, like, I believe you, I trust you. Like, I feel like we're, long lost, like, lifelong friends already. And glad we found each other. I'll tell you this, a lot, like, Boston there's a lot of different parts of it. There's a lot of different areas of town. Like, there's, the place that I started out was like in Cambridge, which is across the river
Okay.
from Boston, in the Harvard Square area. So, like, Harvard's right there, MIT is nearby, a lot of colleges. And so I feel like that was the audience that was coming to that club. So that club was kind of a very warm, welcoming place. It was very, like, alt comedy friendly. Like, Eugene Merman, I don't know if you know his stuff, like, he started out there. And
Yeah.
Brendan Small, who made the show Metalocalypse and Home Movies. And like all of these, like a bunch of like Conan producers would come sometimes, and like and so it was like a place that people would come and sit down. I feel like a lot of college students were used to sitting and raising their hands if they wanted to talk, and it wasn't threatening. It was just it was like the comedy womb, you know. It was a
Yeah.
great place to develop. And then it's also important to go out and across the river, it's more like, you know, Goodwill Hunting, and there's, you know, like people getting into fights in the street, and, you know, sometimes the big club there would have tourists or like people who didn't speak English who were staying at a hostel nearby, and it was just like, or people weren't there to see you know, they were there to see the famous headliner or whoever it was. And then you go outside of Boston, like there was a place, I remember a place called Nick's Comedy Stop in Brockton, which was like an area, maybe like, you know, half hour, 40 minutes from the city. And that, I felt about that, and a lot of the shows in Boston, about the same way that you did. I was scared to perform in Boston and around Boston and in like the suburbs of Boston, but that's where I was. So I
Yeah.
didn't have a choice. And like the good news is, like, a guy asked me once who he came to a show I was doing in New York, and in between, I was doing a couple shows, and in between, he was asking me, he's like, I think I want to do comedy. I was like, well, have you done it? He said, I did it like once at an open mic, but he's like, I was like, why aren't you doing it more? He's like, well, I'm afraid. I was like, what are you afraid of? And he says, I'm afraid that people won't laugh at the things I say. And I was like, well, I've got some good news for you, because fear is about the unknown, right?
Mhm.
Fear is because you don't know what's going to happen. And I can almost guarantee you that people will not laugh at the things that you say when you start out. So there's no need to fear that they won't laugh. Just know that they won't laugh. I mean, that's like, have the bar be as low as possible. Just doing it. So I mean, like, you don't look, I'm not trying to talk you into going to Boston, but if you go to, like, you could have that be like you can make a documentary about, like, I'm gonna go to Boston and face
Yeah.
my fear and just step on stage there, and like, truly, like, I think that, you know, things are changing all of the time. Like, I haven't lived there in 15, 16 years, but I go
Yeah.
back and visit occasionally, and there's a lot of really cool, like, up and coming, like, just venues are popping up and shows are popping up, and like, there's don't tell comedy shows everywhere, and
Yeah.
like, there's cool environments. There's a place there called Duck Duck Goofs, which I like a lot.
Yeah.
And like, there's a lot of, you know, younger, you know, obviously like comedians of all ages, but like a lot of younger people are starting out. And I feel like the vibe that younger comedians are bringing is a lot more like diverse and inclusive, and, you know, a lot of progressive. And don't worry, there's still a lot of old racists, but there's so much like welcoming, you know, like,
Mhm.
and I feel like there's a lot of like cross cultural collaboration among cities, like things like the don't tells, you know, like if you do a don't tell in one city and you're going to go to another city, like, oh, do they have a don't tell comedy scene in this city? And that
Yeah.
can be, I feel like the people who put that together, like, they really know what they're doing, because they're like, we want everyone to have a good time. That's what we want. Like, we want the audience to have a good time. We want the comedians to have a good time. And so there's a lot of that there. So like, for me starting out, it was both. It was like, there's a lot of, you know, welcoming. Yeah. And you sort of, you find what you're looking for, you know, if
Mhm.
you're, you know, if you're a kind person, you know, and you show up and you do your time and you're respectful and you learn from the more experienced comedians and you hang out and you watch, like, there's going to be a lot of people in, I think, in almost any comedy scene in any city that will be, you know, good, friendly to you and welcoming. Like, there were definitely some people who seemed more approachable than others, but, you know, if you hang out for a while anywhere, like, you know, again, the unknown is what's scary. You
Yeah.
haven't performed there, so you're like, I don't know about it. But, you know, some people might be like, I don't know about, like, there's people on both coasts that are probably like, ooh, I don't know about performing in between the coasts. I'm gonna stick
Yeah.
to the coast. So we
Mike,
all definitely fear.
you know what, Mike, you if I needed a dad, I would definitely call you for that was a very good motivational talk. What's your best, like, Boston comedy scene story? Like a one story that you just will never forget, like best
Uh,
memory from the scene.
Sure. I mean, there's probably so many. Some of them I talk about on stage, but this is one that I don't really. This is sort of like when I was starting out, uh, the thing that I was afraid of did happen, and it's also okay. And then it becomes a story, you know? Like, I've seen comedians, like, powerful, hilarious headliners, tell have a whole set full of the shows that didn't go well,
Mhm.
like those are all beautiful, experiences that can be alchemized into, like, if it's not going well right now, well, good news, that'll be a real fun thing to tell your friends and future audiences later. So I remember my friend Erin Judge. She's a super funny comedian who I started out with, and she had done this gig the year before, and it was like in some, I don't know, Elks Lodge or some kind of like man club that I'm not familiar with,
Mhm.
like a Knights of Columbus or whatever those things are. It would seem like an old Italian man smoking cigar venue. That was
Yeah.
that was what it was. And she told me she had a great time and like made fun of them and did a lot of crowd work. And this is like I was only a few years in, and I was like, well, I don't really do a lot of crowd work, so I don't. Oh, but I was delusionally self confident. I'm like, my friend had a good time. I'm funny like my friend. I'll do it. And I show up and they're like showing me around and like, all right, these are the topics that are off limits. I'm like, okay. Like they're like, don't make fun of, Italian people. I'm like, but they're only Italian people. Like, okay, that's fine. And they pointed out like, here's the people that you can make fun of for these reasons, right? Like that guy just hangs at a strip club all day. That guy has only worn one pair of shoes for the past 25 years. That guy's last name is the word gay. So like whatever you can do with all that, I was like, well, I
Yeah.
don't know if I can do anything with any of that. And then there was like no stage, and they just I think there was like music going on, karaoke, and then they shut off the music and the guy comes on the microphone and is like, all right everyone, the buffet for dessert is open and also there's a comedian. And I think I was hired to do 30 minutes.
Mhm.
And as I was like getting the lay of the land, I was like, I can talk for 30 minutes, but I don't think any of us are going to want me to talk for 30 minutes. And the guy's like, so what did we ask you to do? Like how much time? And I was like, you said 30. And he's like, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a little more money if you want to do 45. And I was like, can I give you money and I'll leave right now? So that, I think that was, just some basement in the
Yeah.
Boston area. And I mean, thankfully, like there's so many shows that I had. I mean, so, like, here's a positive memory. So I started in 2002, and in 2013, I got to record my first hour special at the Wilbur Theater in Boston, which is like, an 1,100 seat theater that I'd only previously, like, I'd opened for big comedians there,
Mhm.
I forget all of them, but I opened for like Greg Barrett and I think maybe John Oliver, like just a bunch. Like it was such a cool thing to get to have somebody like want me to, ask me to, invite me to, and like fill that place so that could be like it was a really, I'd moved to New York, but it was really fun to come back to my comedy home, my birthplace, and film that. And like I have some good friends who are my friend because they saw that special and like reached out to me, and like a guy who went to my college, but we weren't really, we didn't we met in 1999, and
Uh-huh.
then we became friends in 2019, like 20 years later, because he had sent me an email because he liked my comedy special and because I'd made an impact on him when he was like friends with my girlfriend in college and we'd met
Uh-huh.
once. And like my girlfriend, before we met, saw my special, or maybe we had met a few times at a comedy show. And so like I can't point to all of the things, but I'm like, incredibly grateful and happy with, a lot of what's going on in my life that I owe to like sort of the organic accident of even starting to do comedy in
Yeah.
Boston and then getting all of the opportunities that I would get to both, professionally and personally. So I just, yeah, some of my best friends are comedians that I started out with or met along the way in Boston. So yeah, I love it, but yeah, you should stay away.
How did you know it was time to move from Boston and go to where everybody wants to go, to New York? How did you know that it was time to make that move?
Sure, that's a great question. So 2002 I started, and then a few years in, a buddy of mine was like running an open mic on Monday nights in Somerville, which is just like a suburb in the Boston area. And he asked me if I wanted to like host it with him. And I remember I just got into this groove, like probably like about where you are, like 4 or 5 years in, I found like, there were some shows happening every night. Like you couldn't necessarily get on all of them all of the time, but I could perform at, open mics, Sunday through Thursday, and
Mhm.
hopefully get on some book shows those days or on the weekends. And hopefully you're getting paid, to travel a little bit, an hour here into Rhode Island, into Connecticut, into New Hampshire, into Vermont. There's a lot of tiny states in a, you can get a lot of places if you drive 3 hours to do 5 minutes sometimes.
Mhm.
And what for me, I was very fortunate that in in 2007 or so, I think I got a college booking agent, and I was very lucky that I got to do a NACA. Are you familiar with NACA?
Yep.
For your listeners, it's the National Association of Campus Activities. A bunch of students and their advisors put on conferences where magicians and musicians and comedians and dancers and anyone that they might want to book to be talent to come to their school, like for orientations or big shows or a comedy series. And it's pretty competitive to get in. So I was lucky to get picked to showcase for them. And I did well. And so that in like 2007, 2008, I got enough money from those college shows that I was like, well, if I don't think I need to do any other, if I think this is enough money to live for a year, or with all the other stuff I was doing as well. I was like, if I could keep this up, which,
Mhm.
is no guarantee, but I'm like, I'm optimistic. So that was one aspect of it, was that I had this fortunate, financial creative windfall opportunity arise. Then I also in 2008 got the opportunity to, I think 2007 I got to be on Comedy Central, had a competition. So I wasn't on Comedy Central, but they had like 8 or 9 different cities where they had maybe 8 different comedians chosen. And I didn't win, but I got to the finals and they flew us all to LA, and I, competed. And uh, a lot of us just got to be on Comedy Central's Live at Gotham the following year. So
Yeah.
2008, that was my first TV credit. And so even with all that, like I wasn't like, I should definitely move to New York now. I was actually like comfortable in the groove. Like I was like, oh, I do my host my open mic on Monday, try a few other jokes out, that worked on the next couple days at other
Mhm.
shows, like then incorporate them into, my sets moving forward, like over the weekend. And I was like, I think I could keep doing this. And then all the while, I'm also in grad school. And so that was an advantage that I had, that's similar to, the day job, that I didn't have to, I was working as a resident assistant at Boston University. So I lived on campus for free. Like I had to
Yeah.
do some job type stuff for it. But basically I had a lot of free time. I was basically finished with my classes for my master's degree. And it was just I was happy to be they let me just keep being a student. They just kept signing up. They, like my advisor, I was supposed to be writing a thesis, and she's like, "You're still working on your thesis?" I'm like, "I'm still." We'd have a conversation like, once or twice a year, but like, this idea, okay, well, I'm gonna keep doing comedy. And like I eventually did get it written and did get it done in 2008 ish, but I think not even, I think I even moved to New York before I completed my thesis, when my advisor was like, "Do you want to finish?" I was like, I mean, I guess I'm kind of doing comedy now. But all that was happening, and I was just really comfortable, like living where I was living, like with very few, with no rent to pay, with, little stipend coming in from the job. I was working as a barista at the Barnes and Noble cafe.
Mhm.
I was studying linguistics, and so I worked at a technology company in the speech and language department, and that was like a fun job to have. And so I liked my life, but and so I guess the main spark, the one of the main sparks was that college gig opportunity. Uh, and then I also met a woman who was a comedian who lived in New York, and that was also 2008. And we hit it off. And I was like, getting my girlfriend is on the other side of this screen right now,
Uh-huh.
and we've been together for 8 years, and we love each other, and she just gasped because she doesn't know that I ever dated anyone else before 8 years ago. She thinks I came into the world fully formed. She is very funny and is making a fun joke. I was also married at one point, and oh no, she gasped again. And that is a fun life bit that we always do, or she always does.
Yeah.
It's all her. But so this particular woman I met, and I was coming to the end of a school year, and I was planning on moving out of the dorm. I was like, I think this is time to make a big move out of the dorm and into a different place in Boston, and
Mhm.
then eventually to New York. And this woman who I met in, April of 2008, she was like, well, if you're moving out of the dorm and you want to eventually move to New York, why don't you just move to New York now? You can move in with me, and that will make my rent be less. And then if it doesn't work out between us, then we're in the same position we were before, but you're in New York and you can find your own place and I'll find my place. And we ended up staying together for 2.5 years, even though we moved in after only knowing each other about 3 months, which I don't, recommend as a general policy. But it got me there. So that was the two main reasons that I moved to New York were, professional delusion and personal delusion. So, which is, that's how to do anything. Like, why do anything at any point? Like, you're almost always gonna either do it too late or too early, and either way, you'll learn something. And maybe too late, both of them have their pros and
Yeah.
cons. Like, I remember talking with Eddie Brill, he's a comedian who was the booker for Letterman, for stand-ups on Letterman for a long time. And I remember he told me when he did his Comedy Central half hour, he was like, he's like, even if I had done it 1 year early, he's like, I wanted to do it earlier, but he's like, if I had done it 1 year earlier, then I wouldn't be the comedian I was when I did it. So it was like the exact right time to do it. And I remember another friend, Val Kappa, who was doing comedy when I started out in Boston, and she did Premium Blend, and she had come up with like a bunch of people who did it a little sooner. She had like everyone else in her comedy class, she felt like, was succeeding like one step ahead. But I remember she told me that she was really grateful that she waited for when she did, because things happened like during the taping or during her set or whatever it was. She was like, if I had gotten this opportunity a year or years earlier, she's like, I wouldn't have been ready for it. So if you have to pick, I'd say like err on the side of, wait a little longer, because then you'll be even better when you get where you're going. Of course, don't wait too long, because then you'll never. So what you want to do is wait the exact perfect right time. And what was your question? And oh, how do you know when it's the exact perfect right amount of time? Oh, you'll know when it's a little too late, and then go.
Mike, what I heard you say, what got you to New York is Coochie. Coochie got you to New York, and you've been there ever since. And you
Long
got
story short, yeah. I'm sorry, I forgot how that story ended. You're 100%. I know we wanted this podcast to be a certain length of time, and I did go on for a little while.
No, you're totally fine, man. You've been doing your thing ever since you've been
Yeah.
in New York. You got specials, you got comedy albums. You were doing you have the Dry Bar comedy special live from the universe. How I feel like getting a Dry Bar special is a pretty big deal because too many people, well, not too many people. Some comics say they don't really want to do clean, they don't know how to do clean. So any time a comedian could do a comedy special on a platform that's known for clean comedy, I feel like that's to be applauded. So how was that? How was that process? And like, was those one of those moments? Did you feel like I made it?
Sure. Thank you for asking. I will say this. Actually, it sort of ties in perfectly, because I forget how long Dry Bar's been around, but like maybe, I don't know, close to 10 years is my guess, but I could be way off. But so sometime earlier on, like close to probably, I don't know, like 8 years ago or something, I could look it up exactly. I was invited to do it. And I said no, because it wasn't yet sort of the mega powerhouse that it has become, and I didn't really know a lot about it. And I was sort of a little apprehensive, and I didn't have an hour of clean comedy that I thought would be good to do at the time. So I said no for that time. And then time passed, and Dry Bar, started seeing some people like, oh wow, some people are getting millions of views, and then they and I kept doing comedy, and I was, writing and had a lot more stuff available to me. And then I found out that they also now only want a 25-ish minute set. And so I was like, certainly. I mean, and I've been writing comedy, like I'm not exclusively writing clean comedy, but I've been writing comedy that some of it's clean for years and years. And so the way that it all happened was in like 2021, after things started reopening, after vaccinations, after the lockdown started letting up, I was booked at a college in Utah, and Dry Bar is like based in Utah. They do their filmings generally in Utah, I think exclusively. And so I just sort of reached out through either my college booking agent or somebody to ask, like, hey, is that offer to do a Dry Bar special from 8 years ago still operational? Is it not too late? And they were like, actually, the week that you're coming here is, I think, the very either end or beginning. It was the exact right time for their season of filming. And so they offered me an opportunity to do that. So it just worked out. Flew out to do the college, maybe did, I think, another one or two like warm-up shows, and then recorded it. It was like early September of 2021. And here's part of the process was, since things had just opened up, my girlfriend and I had gone on a little like road trip to do comedy in Kansas City, which is where her mom lives with some of her siblings. And because it had just opened up, we drove there. And so we drove from New York to Kansas City. And I didn't know how long it was going to take. So we took a lot of stops along the way. Actually stopped in, like, I think West Virginia and somewhere in Ohio and St. Louis, and just a couple, 4 or 5 hours each between. And then I think hit Chicago on the way back. And on our way back from Chicago towards home, I remember we had just like, a big chunk of many hours driving. And I had the Dry Bar taping coming up in like a month. And so I had, I think, about 5 comedy albums out at that time, from like 2010 to about 2020. And we listened to them all on that drive. And I drive, my girlfriend doesn't yet know how to drive. So she took notes, and we just listened, and we're like, which of these jokes could be good for Dry Bar? Which of the jokes that I've written, like, I'm not, writing specifically to try and get them to be perfect for it, but I'm like, which ones would be perfect? And we took notes, and it turned out there's like, of the 5 hours of comedy that I created thus far, there was about an hour that we thought, maybe this hour would be okay. And then over the course of the next month, I like honed it. I did just tried to remember all those jokes. So some of them were from like 12 years earlier or 7 years earlier, and I hadn't done them in a long time. And I eventually, settled on, with my girlfriend's help. She's like been a really nice creative partner to have, because she knows me really well, and she knows my comedy and loves me and loves my comedy, and has good, strong, like artistic opinions about what I do. And they align with what I like, sort of my best self and ideas for who I want to be, on stage and in life as well. And so we came down, like, sort of tightened this, like, this diamond out of the coal. Like we shoveled all the coal of my CDs. That's what CD stands for, is coal discovery or coal digging. And then, yeah, just crushed it into this diamond. And that's when I say, some people even say that they crush on stage, and they talk, it sounds like, they're killing or murdering. And that's a little, like, I'm a little more of a pacifist than that. So when I crush on stage, it's just crushing jokes into diamonds. And Coal Diamond is what CD stands for. That'd be a good stage name if I didn't have one already for the past 22 years. Cole, if there's a comedian out there, you're looking for a name, Coal Diamond, it's available, it's for sale. But yes, it was a really cool opportunity. And I'm really happy with the way the tapings went. And then it was like a year and a half before it even came out. So we taped it in 2021. It came out in 2023. So it's been out about a year now. And so far, it's only available in full on the Dry Bar app. And hopefully they usually eventually release them, to YouTube. So that's when millions of people will watch and my life will change forever. But for now, it's just been changing forever, every moment in a gradual, incremental way that I'm also grateful for. But so it ended up being like kind of a greatest, cleanest hits. So like, if you've never seen me, it's like a nice place to start. If you've seen me, like, you might be like, oh, like maybe you don't remember all of these jokes, and there's like a few new things and like some connections between jokes that, like, I found a callback from a joke, that I told in 2014 to an album joke that I had in 2009 or 10. I was like, oh, I never told these jokes on the same show together, but now I am. So it's like it was like a beautiful experience overall. So I was very grateful to get to do it, and I'm happy that it's out there. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, man, Dry Bar I love it. I mean, I've never really sat down and watched all of them, but I just think it's a cool platform, and it does give comedians something else to strive for.
Oh yeah, I wonder how long it would take to sit down and watch all of them, because I think they now record. I think they must do like a few dozen comedians
Mhm.
maybe like every 6 months or maybe every 3 months. So it could be like 100 a year, and
Yeah.
for the past 10 years, so there's probably like 1,000 hours. I guess you could knock that out if you don't go to work. So what you want to do, I know you want to be a full-time comedian, but what I recommend, have you ever thought about being a full-time Dry Bar audience member watcher?
Now I am going to ask you for advice. I'm going to take this opportunity to ask you for advice, right? So where I'm at right now in my career is I am, during the summertime is when they have all these competitions and like lightweight festivals, and I kind of see them as auditions to see like what could we add to our roster for this club. So like probably 2 years ago, boom, was out the first round. And then the second year, boom, made it to the semifinals and then some finals. But I didn't place. Now this year, placings is starting to happen. I expect to make it to finals for some of them. What advice would you have for people who are like me, who are stuck in between open mics, but yet still trying to get their foot in the door for for comedy clubs? And the reason why I'm asking you this is because one of the things I hear a lot of comics say is that, man, I wish it was all about the funny, but it's not always about the funny. One of the things I commend you on is for your professionalism. And I think getting in a club, one thing that helps is being super professional and being very welcoming and kind and nice, along with also being funny. So what advice do you have for somebody who's making that transition from being an open micer to try to get any spot at a club?
Yeah, man. Thank you for the kind words. I think just by the fact that you're asking the question, my answer will be like to confirm what you already basically know and understand. But I'll say more as well, because I like talking. But I'm like, whatever you think, you're probably right. But also, I heard this thing once. I don't know if it's in show business. They're like, there's three things. Like, if you can be three things, they're like, if you can show up on time, if you can be kind to people, and if you can be talented. Like, really? And then they're like, secretly, you actually only really need to be two of those things. Like, if you're talented and you show up on time, I'm not saying like you shouldn't treat people poorly, but there are people who succeed who only do those two things. Or if you're not talented, but you show up on time and you're nice to people, they might invite you back. And whatever the third version of that is, if you don't show up on time, but you're talented and nice, they'll put up with you.
Yeah.
So, but and sometimes people are like, and maybe you only really need to be one of those things. Like, if you're talented enough, then you don't even need to show up on time or be nice. But if you're the most punctual, then probably you should be one of the other ones. Anyway, but so focus. I mean, if those are three things that make sense, like, definitely treat people well, and like, I can't even track all of the opportunities, like, because you never know why someone reaches out. Like, just this coming weekend, I'm performing at a club in the Chicago area, and it just came up a week ago because there was the comedian they had booked is no longer. They're like, we need somebody to replace this guy. And, there's always an infinite supply of comedians. Like, how do you set yourself apart from everyone? Well, I mean, here's the thing. The woman who I dated when I moved to New York, I remember her saying, like, why would anyone come see me when they could go see Dave Attell?
Mhm.
And my answer is, I mean, number one, somebody might like you more than they like Dave Attell. Like, even the best comedians, there are people who don't like them or don't resonate with as much. Like, there might be somebody who like really jives, like really loves what you do. And also, probably Dave Attell has a limited number of seats at his show. And if he's sold out, then, well, then if you're performing next door, then, Yahtzee.
Yeah.
And so the only thing that you can control, like, of course, it isn't all a meritocracy. It isn't all that if you are funny, then you will get booked proportionally to that. But the only thing that you can control are the things that you can control. The amount of work and time and effort and resources that you put in to making your comedy the best that you can, and to making your, humanity and your personality and, the way that you live your life to be someone that is fun to be around, that to respect people, like, the basic human things. And I think, yeah, with the contests that you're talking about, like, no contest is in general like the be all end all. Like,
Mhm.
even, back in the 80s, there were not a ton of like competition shows, but it was like Johnny Carson's Tonight Show. That was the game. That was what people wanted. So everyone was like working for that. There's a limited number of spots on that. And there's some comedians today who were on Carson's Tonight Show and they're still working, and that's where they got their break. Like Stephen Wright got his first big break on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, got invited back. He had a career almost overnight. He had been a feature in Boston. He got seen, he got on. That is like a rarity at the end of that spectrum, because there's also people who got to be on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show and I've never heard of them and you've never heard of them, and they might have stopped doing comedy, or a career is a marathon, not a
Yeah.
sprint.
Yeah.
And so there's a thing I read once in a book called Zen and the Art of Stand-Up Comedy. And by a guy named Jay Sankey, I believe. And I remember this, like, really, I read it probably 15 to 20 years ago, and it really stuck with me. It said, tonight's show is not what's important. What is important is the comedian that you'll be in 5 years.
Mhm.
Like, here's an analogy too. I listened to a podcast. One of my favorite podcasts is called Savage Love. It's a love and relationship advice podcast, mainly with a guy, Dan Savage, I think he's so smart and funny and on point with advice. And sometimes like teenagers will call in and be like, hey, like, I don't know, girls don't like me, boys don't like me, people don't like me. Like, how do I get them to like me? And his advice to them is often like, don't think about that. Don't think about getting dates right now. Think
Mhm.
about making yourself into a person that's going to be an attractive person to prospective dates in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years. Like, whether it's read a lot and or volunteer or explore your interests or your hobbies or spend time doing meaningful things or work out if you want to be in a certain shape, if you want to look a certain way. Like, look up who is achieving what you want to achieve and what did they do, because there are almost no overnight successes. So find out what's underneath the surface. Like, how many years of how much work, of how much garbage did people eat? How many, of these shows in, basements with these cigar smoking men did they
Yeah.
have to do to gain, the chops and the thick skin and basically the showing up is so much of it.
Yeah.
So real, and like you said, are you doing anything different now than you were a year ago or a year before that, when you started 4.5 years ago and you had nothing? You had no jokes, you had no idea of what would be to come, but then you just you started acting, you started showing up, and then a year later you had a body of work that you didn't have a year before, and then a year later you had more, and a year later you had more. And it's cumulative, and it might even be like exponential, that at a certain point, and you never get there. There's always another horizon. Like once you get to, you're like, man, the thing that I want right now to be in at this club, like I want to be the feature. Well, then I want to be the headliner. Like you said, the levels.
Yeah.
And so I think my advice, in addition to the things that you know already, which is, do your best in comedy and do your best in treating people well and treat yourself well. The additional thing I'll say is, like, appreciate where you are now and don't only look ahead. Look back at
Mhm.
look how much better. If you're competing with anyone, compete with your past self and say, like, how much better am I doing than that guy? What have I learned? What jokes do I have right now that I didn't have last year? What experiences have I had under my belt? Like, oh, like I'm in the finals of this competition that I didn't even get out of the first round 2 years ago. And like, that competition isn't, quote unquote, the most important thing, but it can be a valuable metric. I mean, I
Yeah.
will also say I did the Boston Comedy Festival for many years. 1 year I came in second, and the next year I came in third, and then I stopped doing it. But then, I mean, the competitions can be good practice for, 5-minute audition sets for comedy festivals or for
Mhm.
late night sets, and just for being, comfortable putting together a 5-minute set, when ultimately, you don't get into comedy to just do 5-minute sets, most people, but
Yeah.
that's one tool in the toolbox of making your way to becoming an intergalactic headliner, and then Kevin Hart is almost there. But yeah, just so look back at where you were, in addition to looking forward to where you want to be, and look where you are right now and appreciate, like, what you have in this moment and where you are in this moment. And it seems like you're doing a good job at that. So the fact that I don't have any more advice for you is because you don't need it.
Myq, man, I think yeah, you just confirmed you're about to be my new dad, because you're in my head too much. I be like, when I get off stage now for these competitions, I don't be salty. Like, some people be like, you should have won it, and I be like, bro, no, I should have did a different set. That's what I should have did. Like, that's what I'm looking like. Nah, it would have went better if I would have did this joke, this joke, this joke, and that's how I
Oh,
think about it. And then another thing you said was, you was talking about like working on yourself for being attractive. Like, dang, I'm doing that right now. Like, in therapy, working on my inner self to make myself more attractive. You got to get out of my head, man. I don't know. I don't know. I think it's the beard or the genius you
yeah.
are. You gotta get out of my
I
head.
am your therapist. I don't know. This is just a disguise. That wonderful. Let me say these, at least one or two things that you just reminded me. Number one is, I did America's Got Talent in 2015, and I made it.
Uh-huh.
I was in 3 rounds. I passed out of the first round, and then this judges cut round, and the judges cut round went so great. The first 2 rounds went so great, and the third round was live at Radio City, live, and it went fine. It wasn't my favorite set, and they didn't advance me. It wasn't the judges' favorite set, and that's number one. It didn't make me feel good. I regret. I was like, I could have done. What if I had done different jokes? I had these other jokes that actually went well in the first set that they didn't even air, that I could have used again. I didn't even realize that. And so I kind of spiraled on that for a little while. But I don't, the way that I think about that now, like, it doesn't bother me anymore, in part because I'm so grateful for all the things that I have accomplished since then, that if things had gone differently, who knows what would have happened. I wouldn't be the person I am now that I'm happy with. And like, that was in 2015. I met my girlfriend in 2016. And I honestly feel like if I had won America's Got Talent, or if I had even advanced further to the finals, then maybe I would have been on tour and too busy, like not in the city doing the show I was when we talked. And I talked to my girlfriend for the first time for hours after a show. Maybe I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do that show. Truly, like, I might not be in this very apartment right now. You'd be talking to an empty screen. And so I'm really, like, we never know. We only know what was. We don't
Mhm.
know what could have been or what would have been. So, like, who knows? Maybe if you did those other jokes, it would have gone we just don't know.
Yeah.
The other thing about it is, I heard this thing once. I forget whose quote this is, but they say, better to not have a statue of you and have people say, hey, Why doesn't that guy have a statue? That person should have a statue. Better that than to have a statue and have people like, why does that guy have a statue? That guy shouldn't have a statue. We should tear down that statue. So I feel like that's where you're at with like, if people are like, better to have people say you should have won when you didn't than to have people say you shouldn't have won when you did.
I ain't gonna hold you. Mike, hold on.
Message.
What I will say is this: if I do get a statue and y'all motherfuckers tear it down, I'm beating y'all's asses. Don't tear down don't touch my statue. I don't care what allegations come out. Don't touch it.
Oh, yeah, you'll be dead when they tear it down. So you'll have to come back as a ghost and haunt them. It'll be fine.
Oh, that is so funny, Mike. You're good. You're good with words, man. I can see you using that on your girl that's sitting across from you. Be like, you know what? If I would have won that competition, girl, I wouldn't know who you are right now.
Yeah,
less than you are in my life.
She's worth $1 million. I would not trade the last 8 years of my life for $1 million.
Well, I'm glad that you got to that point in your life and that you found true joy and happiness, Mike. We're all on that journey together. As I start to wrap this up for you here today, I always end the podcast with the same few questions. So here we go. Who is on your Mount Rushmore for comedy?
Oh man, too many people. So more than just these four, but I'll say to start with Maria Bamford and Baron Vaughn and Joe Firestone and Nick Vatterott. Those are like truly, it's impossible for me to name. Like I could name literally dozens of others now that I revere and love and delight in as much, or like in different ways. Every one of them is a unique, beautiful snowflake of, comedic art, like, Reggie Watts and, Aparna Nancherla and Rory Scovel. And, like there's just so many. I love so much comedy. And Gary Goldman. Like I don't want to, I think, they should. It's funny. They're such four big heads. If only they had put 1 million, then I would be able to. But those are the ones I'll leave it there. But message me and anybody out there, and I'll tell you dozens and dozens more of my favorite comedians.
Mike, what words of encouragement could you give to any comedians that's listening to this right now?
Sure. A lot of people, I feel like a lot of advice that people give is like, if you think you couldn't do, like here's a joke I wrote. A kid actually came up to me once, like a college kid, and was like, "You do comedy? Should I do comedy?" And I was like, "Well, I can't tell you how to live your life, but I was like, do you think you could imagine yourself doing anything other than this?" And he said, "No." I was like, "Well, then you shouldn't do comedy because imagination is very important." And like, you can't even imagine plumber, but truly people sometimes are like, if you can't imagine yourself doing, like, that's not the question for me. Like you could look, I think I could be a doctor or a scientist or a lawyer if I wanted to, and maybe it would help the world in different ways. But I'm glad that this is the path that my life has taken, that I've chosen. And so just, do you want to? Do you love it? If you love it, remember that you love it. Remember, I think of it like a jacuzzi. You ever in a jacuzzi and you're like, this is warm and it feels good. And then every once in a while, that when you're in there, you're like, well, this is actually, it's not the same as getting into it. You're just in it. But if you come out of it for a second and then dip back in, that's the experience I get when people are like, you get to do comedy for a living. You just get to do comedy at all. You get to go on stage and share your thoughts and feelings and ideas, and people laugh and like it and resonate with it. And it, it helps people and changes people and helps you and changes you. I'm like, oh yeah, that's true. That is what happens. I love it. And that's like pulling myself out and then dipping myself back into like the jacuzzi of my life. So just whatever, anyone out there who wants to do it, try it. And if you love it, keep doing it. And if you stop loving it, remember that you loved it. And I mean, you don't have to keep doing it, but pull yourself out for a minute, like, and then put yourself back in it. And I think you might find you love it again.
Message.
Mike, tell people why they should listen to Comedians in Bed.
people should listen to Comedians in Bed because I assume that's the very show that we're on right now. Because if you don't listen to it, then you won't hear me just learning the name of the show in real time. But like truly, we've never spoken. We've only communicated online up until now. And you're a delight. You're curious. You love comedy. You love learning. You ask good questions. Like I assume that every conversation that you have isn't with me. There's probably other guests, but I'm optimistic that when you listen to this show, you will get thorough, meaningful, beautiful, like curious, inquisitive, like discussions and sort of like adventures of comedy and life and philosophy. And it's just it's a great time. I had a great time talking, so I can only imagine that people also will have a great time listening.
Myq hit it right on the nose. Myq, tell people where they can find you at, and you also have shows when this episode comes out this week in the Ohio area. So tell them where they can find you at this week, also in Ohio.
Yes, September 11th, 2024, will be headlining the Columbus Funny Bone, and September 12th, 2024, will be headlining the Liberty Funny Bone in the Cincinnati area. You can find all my name is spelled weird, Myq, Myq, Kaplan, Kaplan. That part's regular. Myq Kaplan. Find me on social media. My website's myqkaplan.com. Put it anywhere that you think you might find. My albums are all on your various streaming platforms, your Spotify's, your Apple Music's. I have my first hour special is on whatchamacallit, Amazon. That's one. You've heard of it. My second hour special is or was filmed New York City in August and will be coming out. So look for that soon. That one will be called Before We Get Started. And I look forward to getting started with this podcast conversation as well that we're having right now. And but yeah, just at Myq Kaplan on all the social media, spelled my weird way. And I have a Substack newsletter as well called Arty Harhars. And it's myqkaplan.substack.com. Oh, and in addition to the Dry Bar special, I put out a book last year with my buddy Ramin Nazer, who's a beautiful artist. He illustrated a bunch of my jokes, and our book is called Heartbrain Art Train. So check out any or all of that. Just put Myq Kaplan where you want to find Myq Kaplan. Come see me live, listen to my comedy. Come see me in Ohio. And if you're not in Ohio, other places as well. So thank you so much for having me. This has really been a pleasure.
Yeah, man. Make sure you check out Myq if you want to see next week's episode. We stream live every Tuesday at 11 a.m. on my YouTube channel at TYE Comedy. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you share it, or you can listen wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, all that good jizz. If you want to see weekly clips, you can go ahead and follow us on my on Comedians in Bed podcast on Instagram. Myq is here all week in Ohio, Cincinnati, Columbus, so make sure you check him out. We enjoyed having him on this show. Make sure you check out the specials, the albums, all of that. Make sure you just blow him up. If you see him at the club this weekend, tell him you saw him here on Comedians in Bed, and the next show he'll give you like a sticker for free. I don't know. Be sure to check us out next week. Myq, want to thank you again. And